Hi and welcome to a quick review. Today we're going to talk about the BMW S1000RR SAC settings, and that applies to BMW S1000RR model years 2012, 2013 and 2014. We're going to start with the rear and then we're going to move to the front. So let's start. So in the rear here we have shock with full range of adjustments, including a preload and a spring, high and low speed compression adjustment and a rebound adjustment as well. So first of all, the standard settings, how a bike comes off a factory, is the 10 millimeters of a thread showing in here for the spring preload adjustment, and that basically means two things. With a very progressive linkage between the frame, swing arm and the shock, that gives, on a soft spring as it installed from the factory, that gives 10 mm of a sag when the bike is sitting on its own weight comparing to fully extended rear end, and approximately 20 mm of total sag, this is including the rider weight, and that is grossly insufficient, I would say, because normally you're looking for something from 25 to 35 millimeters, with golden thumb rule approximately 28 millimeters of a sag in the rear. This is where you want to be generically for fast riding on the street and a truck use at the same time without any more changes done to the bike. So the rear also has the rear height, right height adjuster, which is this eccentric in here on the top of a shock mount. So let's start generically with a concept, I guess. So BMW did a few changes to the geometry in the model year 2012 comparing to previous model years, and what we did is we increased the swing arm angle, and that was done by moving the pivot of a swing arm up by 4 millimeters and also shortening the shock by 4 millimeters. As a result, the swing arm angle increased. There is more stability when you're driving out of a turn, accelerating out of a turn because of a steeper swing arm angle. Also, we increased the rear sprocket size by 1/2 to 45, comparing to 44 before, to give more acceleration performance. But for any very strange reasons, we somehow missed or intentionally did the total sag approximately 20 millimeters for the average rider of 80-85 kilograms, and that is insufficient, as I said already. So what you're looking for is 28. So how to get to that point? Of course, many may say that you can just decrease the spring preload and you will get that sag you're looking for, but just decreasing the spring preload is very dangerous on the bikes with very progressive rear linkage between the shock frame and the swing arm, because that puts you the swing arm and the linkage in a position where it becomes very stiff. So on the bike, when you just buy it and you want to decrease the spring preload to get the sag number you like, you will get very stiff ride, especially that can be felt through bigger bumps, and it will hurt the rear. It will hit the rear very hard, and you can feel it through the seat into your spine. You don't want to have that. So the solution for that is to basically not just decrease the spring preload, but also change the right height adjuster. So the swing arm in its normal position when you're sitting on the bike will be where BMW just put it with a 20 millimeter of a sag, with a total sag. And so how to calculate that? So usually on this specific bike, that position is that swing arm position can be measured as approximately, and again you measure from here. I do measure from this lip right above the center of a swing of a rear axle, just this bit over here, to the lip number 3 over here, to the very edge of it, right here. So this distance from here to here, when you sit on the bike, supposed to be 56.5 centimeters. And this is where swing arm wants to be. That gives you approximately, when you sit on the bike, approximately 10 degrees of a swing arm angle. So that keeps all the benefits of a steeper swing arm angle in terms of better drive out of the corners. But to achieve that, as I said, you cannot just decrease the spring preload because it will put you lower. What you want to do is to do both, decrease the spring preload and change the eccentric. So, for example, if in my case I wanted 28 millimeters of total sag, so the standard eccentric, which is supplied from the factory, is 2.5 millimeters off center, and that is sitting actually higher. The mount is sitting right where, up here. So the rate in the lower part of the travel is approximately 2 to 1. So basically increasing the length of a shock by changing the eccentric by 1 millimeter, increasing the ride height in rear by 2 millimeters. So I had 20 millimeters of my total sag, I wanted 28, so I moved this mount point down using the 1.5 millimeter eccentric from HP4 and inverting it. So I had 2.5, I did inverted 1.5, so I got 4 millimeters in total. So I increased the fully extended height of a swing arm when the rear wheel is in the air by 8 millimeters. And I also decreased the spring preload by approximately 2 1/4 of a turn, I think, something like that. And that gave me free sag, so it's the difference between the rear wheel suspended in the air and the bike sitting on its own weight, not on the kickstand, but on its own weight, upright. So that difference now is 13 millimeters, and when I apply my weight to the bike right now, I'm getting exactly 28. And also this difference, this distance from here to that third lip over there, yeah, to very edge of it, right here, right now, is 56.5 centimeters, and this is exactly what I wanted, and this is where the bike used to be before the standard settings. So basically what I did through change of eccentric and inverting that 1.5 millimeter eccentric, removing the stock one, so I removed the 2.5, the stock one, bought 1.5 from HP4, inverted it. So all those changes basically gave the rear swing arm more travel down, but the position when I sit on the bike stayed the same as before. And this is how I got 28 millimeters in the rear. Okay, now moving to the front. So in the front we have conventional fully adjustable forks, and the preload here is an interesting subject. So within these forks there are 3 springs in total. One is air spring, and that is basically the air compressed between the fork cap and the oil, and then 2 springs, the main spring and the top out spring, and those are fighting each other. So the bike comes from the factory with all the preload out on the preload adjuster, and you may measure that as well, but trust me, it works like that. If you change your preload, it basically does not change your sag number, because the distance between 2 measurements, when the front wheel is totally suspended in the air and when your weight is applied to the bike, stays the same, and just the difference stays the same. Ignore 120 millimeter number provided by the BMW for the front suspension travel. You should measure the sag from the point when the forks just stops extending under the weight of the front wheel, and that distance will be less than 120 because there is a top out spring, and that does not allow the wheel to extend completely down. It is fighting the main spring. At some point it wins, and that's it. So you're not actually getting 120 millimeter travel in here, you're getting less. And so if you increase the spring preload, the main spring becomes preloaded more, so it can fight the top out spring with better success. So it basically increases your ride height, but the difference between the bike between the front wheel suspended in the air and your weight applied to the bike stays approximately the same. In my case it is 36 millimeters. And when is there a point to adjust the sag in the front? Is there a point to actually change the preload? Does it make any sense? And yes, it does. So as the bike comes from the factory with all the preload out, you're getting less travel available for you before the forks get into the position when the air spring becomes very, very stiff. And the stiffness of the air spring, that air which is compressed between the fork cap and the oil, increases exponentially through the stroke. So the conclusion here is that you need to adjust the front spring preload just based on your feel, how it feels when you ride it. If you feel that the front end is too harsh over the bumps and the high speed on a track, for example, then you would need to increase spring preload to the point when that feeling is stopped, when you feel the front end is very, very stable and is not getting disturbed by the bigger bumps on the track. And this is where you stop and call it a day. Because, again, when the spring preload is all out, as from the stock configuration, on the stock configuration, this travel here is lower, so the air spring starts to interfere earlier through that available travel you have, and that creates a harsher, more bumpier front end. When you increase the spring preload, you actually get more distance through the travel before the air spring starts to interfere, and that creates a softer front end. So just when, as I said, the main point here is to adjust it so it will absorb the bumps very well without disturbing the front end, giving you a good feel, and that's pretty much it. Now, of course, when you increase the spring preload in the front, you may need to do the following. You may want to increase the rebound damping, so make it slower, because comparing to what it used to be before with a less spring preload, now instead of compressing more on the air spring, you actually, before you start to compress the air spring significantly, you get much more compression from the main spring, so it rebounds back quicker than before. Because the air spring will give you a very quick rebound back in the lower portion of a stroke, and when exponentially that force decreases and you get slower rebound and higher. So that is again a progression. And also when you increase the spring preload, so you move everything up, you will need to increase the compression damping as well. And that is because if before the air spring would help, sorry, my NX7 overheated, so you may want to increase the spring preload, you want to increase the compression damping, because if before the air spring had higher influence, so it was stiffer on the compression, now you have the main stroke on just the main spring, and through that you want a little bit slower compression rate, and that you can control with the compression damping. So that is main information about the adjustment of the sag in the front and on the rear. Another thing you may want to do when you do a sag adjustment, you want to measure the geometry of your bike and make sure that your forks angle is correct. If not, you may fix it by moving the forks up and or down, or bike on the forks up and down to get the geometry numbers you like, to get the forks angle you like, and so on and so forth. Also, when you're increasing the spring preload, that distance which fork will travel on a high let's say on a strong braking will be higher, so you may expect a higher tilt down when you brake hard. So comparing to when all preload is out, so the bike is sitting lower and it basically has a stiffer air spring compression rate, and not compression rate, but the air spring interferes earlier, so it holds the bike better. So there is a compromise between how well it absorbs the bumps and how much your bike is tilting. So based on your riding style as well, take into account if you're doing trail braking or not, all of that will end up with adjusting the position of the forks on a triple clamp to give you ride geometry which you like. And that's pretty much it. If you have any comments, then post them. If you have any comments or questions, post them in the comments for this video. I will try to answer them.